Now, after 14 years of construction, Ethiopia has officially inaugurated a controversial mega dam built over the River Nile.
This dam across the Blue Nile is, declared Ethiopia's Prime Minister, the biggest achievement in the history of black people. Abiy Ahmed showed off the grand Ethiopian Renaissance dam to regional leaders at its inauguration on Tuesday.
Can a single project provide electricity to nearly half of a nation's population that earlier did not have access to power? Can one structure, built on a river that has shaped civilizations for thousands of years, redraw the political map of Africa? When you are talking about Ethiopia's newly inaugurated Grand Ethiopian Renaissance Dam, the largest dam in Africa, the answer is yes. Built on the Blue Nile, this $5 billion mega project isn't just about turbines and concrete. It is about rewriting history, reclaiming sovereignty, and daring to challenge the power structures that have dictated who controls Africa's lifeblood for over a century. For Ethiopia, the dam is a triumph of self-reliance, funded not by the IMF or World Bank, but by the sweat and sacrifice of ordinary citizens and its diaspora. For Egypt, it is a looming nightmare, threatening the river it relies on for 90% of its water. And for the world, it is a geopolitical earthquake, proof that Africa no longer asks permission to build its future. So the question we must now confront is this: is this simply a dam, or is it the spark that will forever change how Africa wields its power? In this video, let's find out. For most of the 20th century, Ethiopia was remembered more for famine than for power. The images of starving children in the 1980s cemented a stereotype that Ethiopia, and by extension much of Africa, was dependent, fragile, and incapable of shaping its own destiny. That story has now been dramatically overturned. Rising proudly on the Blue Nile, just 28 miles from the Sudanese border, stands the Grand Ethiopian Renaissance Dam, or GERD, a $5 billion engineering marvel that has lifted Ethiopia from the periphery of global influence into the spotlight of African power politics. At nearly 500 feet high and backed by a reservoir so vast it has been nicknamed Dawn Lake, the GERD is more than just a dam. It is a statement of intent. With a generating capacity of 5.15 gigawatts, it is the largest hydroelectric facility in Africa and among the top 20 worldwide. For a nation long constrained by chronic energy shortages, this means more than electricity. It means transformation. Entire regions that once went dark at sunset now anticipate steady power. Industries, long starved of reliable energy, look toward expansion. Neighboring states, too, see the promise of imported Ethiopian electricity flowing across new trade corridors. But the boldness of GERD lies not only in its scale, but in how it was built. Unlike other megaprojects in Africa, which often rely heavily on the World Bank, IMF, or Chinese credit lines, Ethiopia financed the dam largely on its own. When Western lenders withheld support, largely under Egyptian pressure, Addis Ababa turned inward. Government bonds were issued to civil servants. Farmers gave up portions of their incomes. Teachers sacrificed parts of their salaries. Taxi drivers contributed small but meaningful sums. Most dramatically, the diaspora poured remittances into the project, not for family upkeep, but for a dam they might never see. This was not top-down financing. It was a grassroots industrial revolution. And against all odds, it worked. The symbolism is impossible to ignore. Ethiopia, once the poster child of dependency, has now built a project powerful enough to electrify the Horn of Africa without external masters. It has sent a clear message to the world that Africans can build without begging. But such a leap forward inevitably disturbed an older equilibrium, awakening the most sensitive issue in the region, which is control over water. To understand why the GERD is so controversial, one must trace the river's political history. The Nile is more than a river. It is a lifeline. Egypt, in particular, depends on it for about 90% of its fresh water. But the rules governing its use were written long before modern African states had a say. In 1929, the British Empire, acting on behalf of its colonial holdings, signed the Anglo-Egyptian Treaty, which granted Cairo veto power over upstream Nile projects. Ethiopia, despite contributing 85% of the Nile's flow through the Blue Nile, was not even invited to the negotiations. Then, in 1959, after Sudan gained independence, Egypt and Sudan signed another agreement dividing the river between themselves. 55.5 billion cubic meters for Egypt and 18.5 billion for Sudan. The other 9 Nile Basin states were simply ignored. For decades, these agreements acted as shackles. Egypt wielded them as legal justification to block any upstream projects that might alter the flow. Ethiopia, the very source of the Blue Nile, remained marginalized, effectively told that it could not use its own water. The situation was like owning the well in your backyard, but being told by your neighbor how much you could drink. This is why the GERD has been described as an act of defiance against history itself. Ethiopia is not just building infrastructure, it is dismantling a colonial-era regime that denied upstream nations sovereignty over their own resources. Yet from Cairo's perspective, the project is existential. Even a 5% reduction in Nile flow could devastate Egyptian agriculture, threatening food security for tens of millions. For Ethiopia, the dam represents sovereignty. For Egypt, it feels like survival itself is on the line. The stakes could not be higher. Before we continue further, tell us, are you enjoying the video? If yes, please like and share the video and subscribe to our channel to watch more videos on Black Africa. Let's continue now. Interestingly, the tension has not been confined to the Nile Basin. The GERD has triggered international reactions that reveal how deeply global power structures are entangled in Africa's development. In October 2020, President Donald Trump openly suggested that Egypt might blow up the dam during a call with Sudanese and Israeli leaders. His words, recorded on an official White House call, shocked diplomats worldwide. Soon after, Washington suspended hundreds of millions in aid to Ethiopia. These actions not only showed the volatility of the situation, but also revealed a deeper truth. For decades, Western institutions benefited from Africa's dependency. If Ethiopia could crowdfund and build a transformative project without the IMF and World Bank, it would set a dangerous precedent for outsiders, not for Africans. What would stop Nigeria from financing its own industrial plants? What would stop the Democratic Republic of Congo, home to half of the world's cobalt, from building its own processing facilities rather than shipping raw minerals abroad? This is why GERD is about more than water. It represents a fundamental challenge to the aid and debt dependency model that has long governed Africa's relationship with the world. By changing the model and proving that grassroots financing is possible, Ethiopia has rattled not just Egypt, but the very system that kept African nations dependent. And flipping the script rarely happens without resistance. The official inauguration on September 9th, 2025, crystallized the divide. In Addis Ababa, leaders from Kenya, Somalia, Djibouti, and South Sudan gathered in celebration. Kenyan President William Ruto hailed the GERD as a pan-African statement. Diaspora communities erupted in joy. For many, the dam symbolized not just Ethiopian progress, but African possibility. Yet, conspicuously absent were Egypt and Sudan. Both boycotted the ceremony. Cairo warned that the GERD could devastate its crops if water levels dropped even slightly. Khartoum raised an alarm about dam safety and Ethiopia's unilateral management of releases. Joint statements from the two governments condemned Addis Ababa for threatening regional stability. The contrast could not be starker. On one side, African leaders and citizens celebrated the end of dependency, proof that Africa could fund itself. On the other, downstream states voiced existential fears. This divergence is more than symbolic. The narrative that prevails, whether the GERD is remembered as liberation or aggression, will shape not only Nile Basin politics, but also the broader balance of power across the continent. Beyond symbolism, the GERD offers tangible economic benefits. Ethiopia has long struggled with electricity shortages that stunted industrial growth and left millions without reliable power. The dam promises to change that. With a capacity of over 5 gigawatts, it can electrify homes, factories, and schools, spurring a new era of industrialization. Agreements with Kenya, Tanzania, and Djibouti are already underway, turning Ethiopia into a regional power exporter. Analysts predict billions in annual revenues from electricity sales alone. But the GERD is more than economics. It is a geopolitical battleground. Egypt has rushed to the UN Security Council, portraying the dam as a threat to international stability. Ethiopia counters by framing it as a symbol of sovereignty, Pan-Africanism, and development. Meanwhile, major powers like China, Russia, and the EU tread carefully. Each understands that if Ethiopia succeeds, the precedent is clear. African nations do not need external permission to build transformative projects. That is what truly terrifies old power structures. The GERD isn't just producing electricity, it's producing questions. If 120 million Ethiopians could crowdfund $5 billion, what happens if 232 million Nigerians mobilize their savings? What happens if the global African diaspora, some 360 million people, decides to invest in continental infrastructure rather than send small remittances? The dam is both a machine of energy and an idea machine, sparking questions that could redefine Africa's place in the world. At the inauguration, Ethiopian Prime Minister Abiy Ahmed made the stakes explicit. Declaring the era of begging over, he unveiled a new national vision. Ethiopia, he announced, will pursue a nuclear power program, a mega airport hub for Ethiopian Airlines, new oil and gas ventures, and fertilizer plants. The GERD, in his words, was not the end, but the beginning. He said, "This generation has accomplished a great deed with the Renaissance Dam. The era of begging has ended." Other African leaders echoed this optimism. Kenya's president emphasized Africa's ability to shape its own destiny. Somalia's president called for resource sharing and regional brotherhood. For them, the GERD is not an isolated project, but a blueprint for self-reliance, proof that African nations can marshal domestic and diaspora resources to build their futures. But history offers a warning. Every time Africa has moved toward genuine economic independence, there has been pushback, sometimes diplomatic, sometimes economic, and sometimes military. The GERD may inspire, but it may also provoke. Will the dam catalyze a new African century of self-determination? Or will it become a flashpoint for conflict and external interference? That uncertainty is what gives this project its global significance. What do you think? If Ethiopia could crowdfund $5 billion for a dam, what stops other African countries from funding their own megaprojects tomorrow? What happens when 360 million Africans in the diaspora decide to invest in dams, airports, and industries instead of remittances? And above all, if water can shift power this dramatically, what happens when Africa applies the same principle to oil, gas, or cobalt? Do you want to watch more videos like this one? If yes, subscribe to our channel and press the bell icon next to it. We bring videos on Black Africa, its history, rich arts and culture, and things the world should know about. Thanks for watching, and until the next video, stay tuned.